If you're watching this video right now, you're about to experience one of the most unexpected, emotional, and unforgettable moments ever imagined on any talent show stage. A moment so intense, so unbelievably charged with history, legacy, and raw human emotion, that even the ever-composed Simon Cowell, the man known for his ironclad reactions and unshakable stoicism, found himself overwhelmed, blinking back tears under the blazing stage lights of America's Got Talent. A moment that no one, not the audience, not the judges, and definitely not the millions watching at home, could have ever predicted. It all began on what seemed like a completely ordinary audition day, one of those long, buzzing days where hopeful performers filled the backstage area with nervous energy, excitement, dreams, and the constant hum of whispered rehearsals. But somewhere quietly, tucked into the corners of the lineup, there was a name, a person, an identity that was about to shake the entire atmosphere. Someone who had walked into the building not as a star, not as a celebrity, not even as someone seeking fame, but as someone carrying a legacy so enormous, so monumental, so unmistakably powerful, that it could have overshadowed anyone else. And yet she didn't want that. She didn't mention it. She didn't arrive with an entourage or security, or a crowd of people holding cameras. She came alone with her hands folded, her eyes calm, her identity hidden in the simplest possible way. A sign-up sheet, a number, and a quiet step toward the stage entrance. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew what was coming. And nobody had any reason to expect anything beyond a normal audition. But as the stage manager called her name, a name that sounded completely ordinary, to everyone within earshot, she stepped forward, breathing slowly, her fingers slightly trembling. Not from fear of performing, but from the weight of everything she had carried for so many years. The whispers of people, the expectations, the comparisons, the shadows of a father she loved but lost far too soon. A father whose name echoed through history, through music, through time. She walked out onto the stage with a gentle, almost hesitant smile, the kind of smile that you'd give when you're trying to be brave, trying to stay grounded, trying to keep yourself from being swallowed by the enormity of the moment. And the audience, curious but unaware, clapped politely, expecting nothing more than a simple audition. The judges smiled as well. Simon Cowell, Howie Mandel, Heidi Klum, and Sofia Vergara, all seated, all watching her with neutral curiosity. Simon leaned slightly forward, as he always does, his eyes narrowing. With that instinctive attention he gives performers, he can't quite read hello. He said, his voice calm, inviting, measured. "What's your name?" She paused for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer, but because saying her name had never been simple, not for her, not since childhood. But she breathed in, lifted her chin, and spoke softly. "I'm Mariah, just Mariah. No last name, no explanation." "What are you going to do for us today?" Simon asked. "I'm going to sing," she said, her voice gentle, steady, but carrying the faintest tremble of vulnerability. "All right," Simon replied. "Whenever you're ready," she nodded, took one step back, closed her eyes, and for a single moment, the world seemed to stop breathing. The lights dimmed, the air shifted, and as the music swelled, she opened her mouth and released the first note, a single pure, haunting note that sliced through the silence like a beam of light through darkness. It was soft, trembling, delicate, but filled with something almost indescribable, a familiarity, a tone that made the audience lean in, whispering, glancing at one another, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe, from confusion to realization. Her voice, smooth and emotional, carried with it a texture, a softness, a rawness, a kind of rhythmic soul that felt unmistakably familiar. So familiar that it sent chills through the auditorium, whispers flickering from seat to seat, as people began to recognize something uncanny, something impossible, something that shouldn't be happening right in front of them, but she kept singing, her voice rising and falling like waves, each note trembling with emotion, each word dripping with memories lost, love, pain, and resilience. She poured everything into it, every second of her life, every rumor she had endured, every headline she had read, every moment she had lived in the shadow of a man who changed the world, a man loved by millions, a man whose name she had carried with both pride and sorrow, as she reached the first chorus. The truth, the unspoken truth, hovered in the air like electricity, and Simon Cowell, who had been sitting forward with heightened focus, suddenly froze. His eyes widened just slightly, but enough to show that something inside him had shifted, something had clicked, something unmistakable had just reached him. He recognized it, the tone, the emotion, the soul embedded within the voice. He felt it, the audience felt it too. And for a moment, the entire auditorium seemed suspended in disbelief, as if everyone was collectively asking themselves, "Is this possible?" Could she be? But she didn't stop to explain. She just kept singing, her voice growing stronger, soaring higher, trembling with emotion, so raw that it felt like a confession, a release, a tribute, a message spoken through melody rather than words. When she reached the bridge of the song, her voice cracked just slightly. And that single crack, that moment of vulnerability, struck straight into Simon Cowell's composure, piercing through his famously tough demeanor like a shard of glass. He blinked rapidly, his eyes glistening, his throat tightening, and for the first time in a very long time, he was fighting back tears. Real tears, not from shock, not from a stunning performance alone, but from the emotional weight, the legacy, the connection that had been silently revealed on that stage. Because Simon, like everyone else, had heard the rumors, had seen the documentaries, had followed the stories, had witnessed the world mourn the king of pop, had seen the impact Michael Jackson had on generations, and now here before him, singing with the voice of someone carrying not just talent, but the unmistakable DNA of musical brilliance, stood the daughter of Michael Jackson, not introduced, not announced, not promoted, just revealed through the music. The audience began to rise slowly, one by one, like waves lifting across the auditorium. Some were crying, some were covering their mouths in disbelief, some were gripping the seats in front of them, unable to process what they were witnessing. And she kept singing, pouring her entire soul into every note, every breath, every word, until the final line of the song, when she lifted her eyes, let out the last trembling note, and allowed the silence that followed to swallow the room. The music cut off. The stage lights glowed softly, and for a long, breathless moment, no one moved then. Almost as if a spell had been broken, the entire audience erupted into applause. Cheers and shouts that filled the auditorium with thunderous sound. Simon didn't speak. He couldn't. He leaned back in his chair, his hand covering his mouth, his eyes filled with tears. He wasn't even trying to hide anymore. It was a side of him the world had rarely, if ever, seen. And finally, when he gathered enough breath to speak, he whispered, voice trembling, Was that a tribute to your father?" She nodded silently. Simon swallowed hard, still emotional, and asked softly, Is Michael Jackson your father?" She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears as well, but she nodded again quietly, humbly, without any performance or exaggeration, simply stating the truth, a truth she had carried her entire life. The audience gasped, a wave of sound echoing around the auditorium. Simon sat back overwhelmed, shaking his head slowly in disbelief. "I don't even know what to say," he said, his voice breaking slightly. That was beautiful. It was unbelievable. "You didn't come here for fame, did you know?" she whispered. "I came here because I wanted to sing for myself and for him." And that was the moment Simon Cowell, the toughest judge in talent television, finally let a tear slip down his cheek. The rest of the judges were equally emotional, offering praise, admiration, and heartfelt words. But Simon remained quiet, deeply moved, visibly shaken in the most human way. When it finally came time to vote, Simon didn't hesitate. He stood up, glanced at the golden buzzer, and without another word slammed his hand down onto it. Golden confetti exploded from the rafters, raining down on the stage like a shimmering storm of light, turning the moment into something magical, unforgettable, breathtaking. She covered her mouth, shocked, tears spilling down her cheeks. As the audience roared in celebration, the confetti stuck to her hair, her clothes, her hands. But she stood in the center of it all, smiling through tears, illuminated not by her father's legend, but by her own voice, her own courage, her own truth. Simon approached the stage, something he rarely does, walking slowly through the falling confetti. Until he reached her, "Your father would be so proud," he said softly, almost whispering, his voice shaking with emotion. "And so am I," she nodded, tears falling freely now and for the first time. She felt understood, seen not as the daughter of a legend, but as an artist, a singer, a person who had stepped out of the shadows and into her own light. The world would talk about this moment for years. The clip would go viral, instantly breaking records, dominating headlines, sparking discussions around talent, legacy, and the power of music, to resurrect emotions long buried. But for her, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she had finally sung her truth, finally honored her father in the way she had always dreamed, finally stepped into the world, not as an extension of his legacy, but as the beginning of her own. And so as the confetti continued to fall, and the music faded into the background, the world witnessed not just an audition, not just a performance, but a story of love loss, courage, legacy, and the extraordinary moment when Michael Jackson's daughter stunned the world, moved Simon Cowell to tears, and carved her own place in the hearts of millions. A moment that no one would ever forget.